Welcome to Black Power Stories, where every story reminds us that true justice always finds its way. If you believe everyone deserves dignity, fairness, and respect, you're in the right place. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. The moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, everyone thought they knew who had the power. They were wrong. Officer Daniel Whitmore believed he was dealing with just another stranger at a quiet gas station on the edge of town. He saw an ordinary car, ordinary clothes, and a black woman standing alone under the cold glow of the parking lot lights. He never imagined that the person standing in front of him was the one person in the entire state who could change the future of his career with a single decision. The night had started like any other. The highway outside the small Georgia gas station was almost empty, with only the sound of passing vehicles cutting through the calm evening air. The bright signs above the pumps flickered softly, reflecting against the wet pavement after a light rain. Inside the convenience store, customers moved quietly, buying coffee, snacks, and fuel before continuing on their way. No one expected that this simple stop would become a moment remembered across the entire state. Victoria Bennett stood beside her vehicle, holding a bottle of water and looking at the receipt in her hand. To the people around her, she looked like anyone else finishing a long day. There was no security detail surrounding her, no official vehicle, no sign that she was anything more than a traveler stopping for a few minutes before heading home. But Victoria had always believed that leadership required listening. For years, she had walked through neighborhoods, spoken with families, and visited communities without announcing her title. She wanted to see the reality of everyday life, not just the polished version shown during official meetings. She knew that sometimes the most important truths were found in ordinary places. But Officer Whitmore did not see a leader that night. He saw a situation he thought he understood. His patrol car pulled into the station, and his attention immediately turned toward Victoria. The questions came quickly. The assumptions came even faster. Victoria remained calm, answering respectfully and asking simple questions in return. Her voice never rose. Her expression never changed. She had faced difficult conversations before, but something about this moment felt different. It was not just about a misunderstanding. It was about how quickly someone could be judged before anyone knew the truth. Imagine standing there, surrounded by strangers, feeling every eye watching you while nobody knows your story. Imagine having the answer to every question, yet choosing patience because you understand that truth does not need to shout. That was Victoria Bennett. She could have revealed who she was from the very beginning. She could have ended the situation with one sentence. But she remained silent, observing, listening, and allowing the moment to reveal something much deeper. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one who speaks the loudest. Sometimes it is the person who has nothing to prove. And as Officer Whitmore looked at her with complete confidence, believing he controlled the situation, he had no idea that within minutes, the entire balance of power was about to change forever. Hours before the quiet gas station became the center of attention, Victoria Bennett had been moving through the state just like she always did, without expecting anyone to notice her. She had learned long ago that leadership was not measured by how many people recognized your name. It was measured by how well you understood the lives of the people who depended on you. That belief had shaped every decision she made as governor. Victoria did not want to lead from behind a desk surrounded by reports and meetings. She wanted to see the streets, the neighborhoods, and the everyday places where real people faced real challenges. That was why she often traveled without a large group around her. She wanted honest conversations, not carefully prepared speeches. Earlier that evening, Victoria had finished a community meeting several miles away from the city center. The meeting had lasted longer than expected because residents had shared their concerns about local services, transportation, and opportunities for young people. She listened to every person who stepped forward because she knew that every story mattered. After the meeting ended, she decided to drive herself for part of the journey home. The simple moments between official responsibilities were often the moments she valued most. As she drove along the highway, the familiar lights of small towns passed by her window. She thought about the conversations she had heard that day and the responsibility that came with her position. Being governor was not just about signing documents or attending ceremonies. It was about remembering that behind every number in a report was a person with hopes, worries, and dreams. Victoria had not always been surrounded by respect. Before reaching the highest office in the state, she had spent years proving herself in rooms where people underestimated her before she even spoke. She understood what it felt like to be judged by appearance instead of character. But she also understood that bitterness could never build a better future. Her strength came from patience, preparation, and the belief that change happened when people refused to give up on each other. That evening, she stopped at the gas station because she needed a short break before continuing home. The place was simple, the kind of location most people passed without a second thought. Bright lights above the pumps, a small store near the entrance, and a few customers quietly coming and going. To Victoria, it was just another ordinary stop. She stepped inside, exchanged a friendly greeting with the employee behind the counter, and bought a bottle of water. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody treated her differently because of her title. She was simply Victoria, a person taking a short pause during a long day. But outside, a patrol car was approaching. Behind the wheel was Officer Daniel Whitmore, a man who had become accustomed to making quick judgments. He believed experience gave him the ability to understand situations instantly. He believed he could recognize problems before they happened. But sometimes confidence without understanding can lead someone in the wrong direction. As Victoria walked back toward her vehicle, she had no idea that the next few minutes would challenge everything she believed about fairness, patience, and the responsibility that comes with wearing a badge. And Officer Whitmore had no idea that the person he was about to judge was someone whose story would force everyone around him to look deeper than appearances. The gas station remained quiet under the soft glow of the overhead lights, almost as if the world had slowed down for just a few minutes. Victoria Bennett stood near the entrance of the small convenience store, taking in the familiar sounds around her. The gentle hum of refrigerators inside, the distant movement of cars on the highway, and the occasional voice of a customer passing by created a scene that felt completely ordinary. That was exactly why Victoria valued moments like this. Away from official meetings and public appearances, she could simply observe. She could listen. She could remember the people she served were not just names written on documents. They were families, workers, parents, and neighbors trying to build better lives. As she walked back toward her vehicle, she noticed a young employee named Emily Carter organizing items behind the counter. Emily had only worked at the gas station for a few months, but she had already learned the rhythm of the late evening shifts. She noticed details most people ignored. She noticed the customers who looked tired after long days. She noticed the travelers searching for directions. She noticed the small moments of kindness that often went unseen. When Victoria stopped to pay for her water, Emily immediately sensed something different about her. Not because of her appearance, but because of the way she carried herself. There was a calm confidence in her voice and a genuine interest in the people around her. "Long day?" Emily asked with a friendly smile. Victoria smiled back. A long day, but a meaningful one. It was a simple conversation, only a few words exchanged between two strangers. Neither of them knew that this brief interaction would become important later. Outside, the parking lot lights reflected across the pavement as Officer Daniel Whitmore arrived at the station. His patrol car moved slowly through the entrance before stopping near the pumps. He looked around carefully, searching for anything that appeared unusual. Over the years, Whitmore had developed a habit of making fast conclusions. He believed his instincts were always correct. He believed that a quick decision was better than taking time to understand the full situation. But sometimes the first impression someone creates is not the truth. Sometimes it is only a small piece of a much larger story. Whitmore stepped out of his vehicle and looked toward Victoria. From a distance, he saw only what he expected to see. A woman standing alone. A vehicle parked nearby. A quiet evening at a gas station. He did not see the years of public service behind her. He did not see the thousands of conversations she had shared with people across the state. He did not see the responsibility she carried every day. He only saw a situation through a narrow perspective. Victoria noticed the officer approaching and calmly waited. She had dealt with difficult conversations many times before. She understood that patience often revealed more than anger ever could. Emily watched from inside the store, sensing a change in the atmosphere. The peaceful feeling that had filled the station moments earlier began to fade. No one spoke loudly. No one caused a scene. But something had shifted. The air felt heavier. The silence felt longer. Victoria looked at Officer Whitmore and prepared to answer his questions. She did not know exactly what he believed was happening. She did not know what assumptions had already formed in his mind. But she knew one thing. The truth did not depend on how quickly someone judged a person. The truth would always find its way forward. Officer Daniel Whitmore walked across the gas station parking lot with the confidence of someone who believed every situation had a simple explanation. The bright lights above the pumps reflected against his uniform as he approached Victoria Bennett. To him, this was just another routine interaction. Another moment where he believed he already understood everything before asking a single question. But Victoria noticed something important. She noticed the way his eyes moved before his words did. She noticed the hesitation, the assumptions, and the quiet judgment that appeared before any facts were known. Still, she remained calm. She had spent years in public service learning that the first response often shaped the entire conversation. "Good evening, officer," Victoria said politely. "Is there something I can help you with?" Her tone was respectful and steady. Whitmore looked toward the vehicle nearby, and then back at her. "I need to ask you a few questions about this vehicle," he replied. Victoria nodded. "Of course. What seems to be the issue?" A simple question. A reasonable question. But instead of slowing down and listening, Whitmore continued with the confidence of someone who had already reached a conclusion. He asked where she was going, where she was coming from, and why she was there. Victoria answered every question clearly. She did not become defensive. She did not raise her voice. She simply explained the situation and waited for the misunderstanding to be resolved. Inside the store, Emily Carter watched quietly from behind the counter. She could not hear every word, but she could see the difference between the two people standing outside. Victoria appeared patient and composed. Whitmore appeared certain that he was the only person in control of the moment. That difference caught Emily's attention. She had seen many people walk into the gas station during late shifts. Some were tired. Some were impatient. Some were friendly. But this moment felt different. There was a tension that came not from what was happening, but from what someone believed was happening. Victoria looked at Officer Whitmore and calmly offered more information. She explained that she was traveling home after a long day and had stopped only for a short break. Her words were clear. Her answers were complete. Yet Whitmore continued searching for reasons to support his own assumptions. Sometimes the greatest distance between people is not measured in miles. It is measured in understanding. One person sees a human being. Another person sees only a story they have already created in their mind. Victoria knew that every person deserved to be heard before being judged. She knew that authority came with responsibility. And she knew that the uniform in front of her represented a duty to protect, not a reason to assume. The parking lot remained quiet as the conversation continued. The highway lights moved in the distance. The evening air remained still. Nobody there knew that this ordinary exchange would soon become a moment that exposed much more than a simple misunderstanding. Because the most revealing moments in life often happen when people believe nobody important is watching. And on that night, Officer Whitmore had no idea that every word, every choice, and every assumption would soon matter. The quiet conversation at the gas station continued, but the atmosphere around Victoria Bennett slowly began to change. What started as a simple exchange of questions was becoming something more complicated. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood with the confidence of someone who believed he had already discovered the truth. Victoria remained composed, answering each question carefully and giving him every opportunity to understand the situation. But sometimes the biggest problems begin when someone stops listening. Whitmore looked at the information in front of him and focused only on what matched his assumptions. He did not notice the calmness in Victoria's voice. He did not notice the patience behind her words. He did not notice that she was offering cooperation instead of resistance. "I understand you have concerns," Victoria said calmly. "I am happy to clear up any misunderstanding." Her words were simple, respectful, and direct. But Whitmore's expression remained unchanged. He had spent years believing that being confident meant being right. He believed his position gave him the ability to judge situations quickly. He had forgotten that a badge represented responsibility before it represented authority. Inside the store, Emily Carter continued watching from a distance. She noticed how Victoria never tried to make herself appear more important than anyone else. She noticed how the woman standing outside treated every question with patience, even when the conversation became uncomfortable. Emily had seen many interactions between officers and citizens before, but this one stayed with her. There was something about Victoria's calmness that made the situation feel unusual. It was as if Victoria knew something that everyone else did not. Outside, the lights above the gas pumps continued to shine over the parking lot. A few customers walked by, briefly looking toward the conversation before returning to their own routines. Most people saw only a police officer speaking with someone at a gas station. They did not know the history behind either person. They did not know the years of service Victoria had given to the state. They did not know the decisions she had made that affected thousands of lives. They only saw a moment. And moments can be misunderstood when people do not know the full story. Whitmore asked another question, and Victoria answered again. Her voice remained steady. Her posture remained calm. She understood that losing patience would only make it easier for others to misunderstand her. Throughout her career, she had learned that true strength was not always displayed through immediate reactions. Sometimes strength was the ability to remain calm when others expected anger. Sometimes leadership meant allowing the truth to reveal itself naturally. But Whitmore saw her silence differently. He interpreted patience as uncertainty. He interpreted calmness as weakness. He did not realize that the person standing in front of him had faced far greater challenges than a misunderstanding at a gas station. The moment grew longer. The distance between understanding and assumption grew wider. And as the night continued, one important question remained unanswered. Would Officer Whitmore finally take the time to see the person in front of him, or would he continue down a path created by his own assumptions? Because once a decision is made without the truth, the consequences often arrive in ways nobody expects. The evening air around the gas station grew heavier as the conversation between Victoria Bennett and Officer Daniel Whitmore continued. The quiet confidence Victoria carried seemed almost out of place compared to the growing seriousness of the situation. She remained respectful, hoping that patience and honesty would be enough to resolve the misunderstanding. But Whitmore had already made a decision in his mind. Instead of searching for the truth, he began searching for confirmation of what he believed. I am telling you exactly what happened, Victoria said calmly. I stopped here for a few minutes before continuing my trip home. Her voice carried no anger. There was no frustration in her expression. She simply wanted the conversation to end with understanding. But Whitmore's approach had changed. The questions became less about learning and more about proving a point. He focused on small details while ignoring the larger picture. He looked at Victoria as a situation to handle rather than a person to understand. Inside the store, Emily Carter noticed the shift. She stepped closer to the window, quietly watching. She could sense that Victoria was doing everything possible to keep the conversation peaceful. She could also see that Whitmore was becoming more convinced that his own perspective was the only one that mattered. Emily thought about how quickly people could be judged. A stranger could walk into a room carrying years of experience, kindness, and responsibility, yet someone else could decide who they were within seconds. Outside, Victoria looked toward the gas station sign glowing above the parking lot. She remembered all the times she had spoken about fairness, respect, and accountability. Those words were easy to say during public speeches. But moments like this were where those values were truly tested. She knew that the way people were treated in ordinary situations revealed the character of a community. Officer, I respect the work you do, Victoria said. I also believe every person deserves to be heard before conclusions are made. For a brief moment, there was silence. The highway sounds continued in the background. A vehicle passed by. The lights above the pumps continued shining. It was an ordinary scene, yet the tension between two different views of authority and respect was impossible to ignore. Whitmore looked at Victoria, still unaware of the full story behind the person standing in front of him. He saw someone he believed needed to answer to him. He did not see someone who had spent years answering to the people of an entire state. He did not see the leader. He saw only the image he had created. Victoria understood that revealing her position would immediately change the situation. The moment people learned who she was, their behavior might change because of her title instead of because they understood the principle involved. That was why she remained quiet about her identity. She wanted to see what happened when a person was judged without the protection of a powerful name. She wanted to understand a reality many people experienced every day. The minutes passed slowly. The gas station remained calm, but something important was unfolding beneath the surface. A simple interaction had become a reflection of something much larger. And neither Victoria nor Whitmore realized that the next decision made in that parking lot would determine how the world saw them both. The silence between Victoria Bennett and Officer Daniel Whitmore lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. In that quiet moment, the difference between them became clearer than ever. Victoria stood with patience and dignity, while Whitmore stood with the confidence of someone who believed he had complete control of the situation. He looked at the circumstances in front of him and believed he understood the entire story, but he had only seen one small piece of it. The truth was still hidden beneath the surface. Inside the gas station, Emily Carter continued watching from behind the counter. She noticed that Victoria never changed her attitude, even as the conversation became more difficult. There was no anger in her voice. There was no attempt to prove that she was more important than anyone else. She simply continued asking for fairness and understanding. Emily found that unusual. Many people, when placed in a stressful situation, immediately tried to defend themselves by showing their status or influence. Victoria did the opposite. She remained calm because she believed the truth should stand on its own. Outside, Officer Whitmore looked at the information available to him and prepared to continue with his decision. He believed he was following procedure. He believed he was doing what was expected of him. But procedures were created to protect people, not to replace judgment. Rules were meant to guide decisions, not remove compassion from them. Victoria understood that better than most. Throughout her years of public service, she had met people from every background. She had listened to their struggles, their frustrations, and their hopes. She had learned that a person could never be understood through one glance or one assumption. Every person carried a story that others could not immediately see. The night air moved gently through the parking lot as a few more customers arrived at the gas station. Some glanced toward the conversation before quickly looking away. They noticed the uniform. They noticed the authority. They assumed everything happening must have a clear reason. But they did not know what Victoria knew. They did not know how easily a person could be misunderstood when nobody took the time to listen. Whitmore continued speaking, still unaware of the significance of the moment. He did not know that the woman standing in front of him had spent years encouraging communities to trust public institutions. He did not know that she had built her career around the idea that every citizen deserved respect. He did not know that this ordinary stop at a gas station was becoming a powerful example of why those principles mattered. Victoria looked at him carefully. She was not trying to defeat him. She was not trying to embarrass him. She was simply waiting for the truth to become impossible to ignore. Because she understood something that many people forgot. Real authority was not about forcing others to recognize your importance. Real authority was about knowing your values even when nobody else recognized them. And as the minutes continued to pass under the bright lights of the gas station, the situation reached a point where a single decision would reveal far more than anyone expected. The question was no longer about a misunderstanding. The question was about what happens when someone finally discovers that the person they underestimated was never powerless at all. The night continued quietly around the gas station, but inside that small space between Victoria Bennett and Officer Daniel Whitmore, a much larger question was beginning to take shape. It was no longer just about a few questions or a simple misunderstanding. It was about how quickly a person could be judged when someone decided they already knew the answer. Victoria remained calm, standing beneath the bright lights of the parking lot while the world continued moving around them. Cars passed along the highway. Customers walked in and out of the store. The ordinary sounds of the evening continued, almost unaware that a powerful lesson was unfolding in that small corner of the state. Inside the convenience store, Emily Carter looked toward the front window again. Something about Victoria's confidence stayed in her mind. She had seen people with influence before, but rarely had she seen someone remain so composed when they were being questioned. Most people tried to prove themselves immediately. They explained their achievements. They mentioned their connections. They searched for a way to make others understand their importance. Victoria did not do any of that. She simply stood there as herself. Emily wondered why. She did not know the answer yet. Outside, Whitmore continued reviewing the situation. He checked details, looked at the information available, and believed he was reaching the correct conclusion. To him, everything appeared straightforward. But the problem was not the information he had. The problem was what he chose to ignore. He ignored the possibility that there was more to the story. He ignored the importance of listening. He ignored the fact that every person standing in front of him deserved the same basic respect. Victoria noticed those choices. She had spent years studying leadership, and she knew that moments of pressure often revealed a person's true character. Anyone could speak about fairness when everything was comfortable. The real test came when someone had power over another person. "Officer Whitmore," Victoria said calmly, "I hope we can resolve this by simply looking at all the facts." Her words were not a challenge. They were an invitation to slow down and reconsider. For a moment, the officer paused. There was something about her tone that felt different. It was not the voice of someone trying to avoid responsibility. It was the voice of someone who understood responsibility better than most people ever would. But the moment passed quickly. Whitmore returned to his assumptions, still unaware of the identity of the person in front of him. He did not know that Victoria Bennett was not just a traveler stopping for a few minutes. He did not know that her decisions affected communities across the entire state. He did not know that many people trusted her because she had spent years proving that leadership was about service, not status. The most important detail of the night remained hidden. Victoria could reveal everything with a single sentence. She could change the entire atmosphere instantly. But she chose not to. She wanted the truth to arrive naturally. She wanted the situation to reveal itself without the influence of a title or position. Because sometimes the strongest message is not what someone says about themselves. Sometimes it is what others reveal through their actions when they believe nobody important is watching. And as the minutes passed, the first signs of a turning point began to appear. Somewhere beyond the gas station lights, a phone call was about to change the direction of the entire night. The phone call began quietly, almost unnoticed among the everyday sounds of the gas station. Inside the small office behind the counter, Emily Carter watched as one of her co-workers picked up the phone and spoke in a low voice. At first, it seemed like a normal conversation. A simple question, a routine request. But within moments, the tone changed. The employee looked toward the window, then back at the phone, as if trying to understand what was happening. Outside, Victoria Bennett remained standing calmly beside her vehicle. She did not know that someone inside had started to recognize the situation was not as simple as it appeared. She did not know that the first pieces of the truth were beginning to come together. Officer Daniel Whitmore still believed everything was under control. He continued speaking with confidence, unaware that the quiet surroundings were slowly changing. He looked at Victoria and saw someone he believed needed to explain herself. He did not see the person behind the calm expression. He did not see the years of leadership, the difficult decisions, or the responsibility carried by the woman standing in front of him. He only saw the moment. But moments without context can create the biggest mistakes. Emily stepped away from the counter and looked more closely at the situation outside. She remembered Victoria's words earlier. The calm way she answered questions. The patience she showed even when the conversation became uncomfortable. Something about that stayed with Emily. It did not feel like the reaction of someone who was afraid. It felt like the reaction of someone who knew the truth would eventually speak for itself. Inside the store, the employee ended the phone call and quietly shared what had been noticed. A few details suddenly seemed much more important. The vehicle information, the description, the name that had been mentioned earlier. The pieces of the story were beginning to connect. Outside, Whitmore continued believing that he was the person directing the situation. He did not realize that people nearby were no longer simply watching. They were starting to question. They were starting to look deeper. Victoria noticed the change in the atmosphere. She saw the employee's expression shift through the store window. She saw the small signs that something was happening beyond the conversation in front of her. Still, she remained silent. She had spent enough years in leadership to understand that truth did not need to be forced. It only needed the right moment to appear. Whitmore glanced around, sensing that the attention of the area was slowly changing. The confidence he had carried earlier began to face an unexpected challenge. Not because someone argued with him, not because someone tried to overpower him, but because more people were beginning to see the situation clearly. The person he believed was powerless was actually the person with the greatest understanding of what was happening. And the officer who thought he had already reached the end of the story was about to discover that he had only read the first few pages. The night at the gas station was no longer just about a conversation between an officer and a traveler. It was becoming a moment where assumptions would meet reality. And soon, Everyone standing under those bright parking lot lights would learn that appearances could never tell the entire truth. The atmosphere at the gas station had changed completely, even though the outside world looked exactly the same. The lights above the pumps still shined across the pavement. Cars continued moving along the highway. The small store remained open, with customers walking through the doors as they had all evening. But for the people inside that moment, something important had shifted. The situation that once seemed simple was no longer simple at all. Emily Carter stood near the counter, quietly watching as the information began to spread. She noticed the employee's expression after the phone call. It was the expression of someone who had just realized a major detail had been overlooked. The kind of detail that changes everything. Outside, Officer Daniel Whitmore remained focused on Victoria Bennett. He was still convinced that he understood the situation better than anyone else. He believed his judgment was reliable. He believed his experience gave him the ability to recognize the truth quickly. But experience without humility can sometimes prevent people from seeing what is right in front of them. Victoria looked toward the store and noticed the small movement inside. She understood that something had changed. She did not know exactly what had been discovered, but she could sense that the situation was moving toward a moment of clarity. Still, she remained composed. She had no desire to embarrass anyone. She had no interest in proving that she was more important than the person standing across from her. She simply wanted the truth to be recognized. Inside the store, Emily listened as the conversation about the situation continued. The name Victoria Bennett had suddenly become more than just a name. It carried a meaning that surprised everyone who heard it. The person standing outside was not simply a traveler passing through town. She was someone whose decisions affected the future of thousands of people across the state. She was someone who had spent years serving communities, visiting neighborhoods, and listening to citizens who often felt ignored. The realization moved through the store quietly. Nobody shouted. Nobody created a scene. There was only a growing understanding that the assumptions made earlier were incomplete. Outside, Whitmore noticed the change in the people around him. The confidence he had carried earlier began to feel different. He looked around and saw that the attention of the situation was no longer centered on his authority. Instead, people were waiting to see what would happen next. Victoria finally spoke with the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. I believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect while the facts are being understood. Those words carried more weight than a title ever could. They were not spoken as a warning. They were spoken as a reminder. A reminder that fairness should not depend on who someone is. It should exist because every person deserves it. In that moment, the true difference between Victoria and Whitmore became clear. One person believed power came from being recognized. The other understood that real leadership came from how people were treated when nobody knew who was watching. And as the night continued, the final piece of the truth was about to arrive. The person who had been underestimated was about to be fully seen. And the person who believed he controlled the moment was about to discover that the greatest lessons often come from the situations we think we already understand. The sound of approaching vehicles slowly became noticeable in the distance, cutting through the quiet atmosphere of the gas station. For several minutes, everyone nearby had been waiting without knowing exactly what would happen. Next, Victoria Bennett remained calm beside her vehicle, while Officer Daniel Whitmore stood nearby, still trying to understand how the situation had changed so quickly. The confidence he carried earlier was no longer the same. The attention of everyone around him had shifted, and for the first time that evening, he seemed to realize that there were details he had never considered. Inside the store, Emily Carter watched as the first official vehicles arrived. The lights reflected across the parking lot, creating a moment of silence among the people who were still there. Nobody rushed forward. Nobody needed to. The presence of the arriving officers alone changed the feeling of the entire scene. Captain Marcus Reed stepped out and looked across the gas station. His expression was serious, but calm. He was not there to create confusion. He was there because a situation involving the governor required immediate attention. As he walked closer, the people nearby began to understand that this was not a normal response. There was a level of respect and urgency that could not be ignored. Officer Whitmore looked toward Captain Reed, expecting an explanation. Instead, the captain looked directly at Victoria. For a moment, the entire area became quiet. Then Marcus Reed spoke. Governor Bennett. The words were simple. They did not need to be louder. They did not need to be repeated. Everyone understood immediately. Emily felt a wave of surprise as she looked back toward Victoria. The woman she had spoken with moments earlier, the woman who had stood patiently through every question, was the governor of the state. The person who had been treated like an ordinary stranger was actually one of the most recognized leaders in the region. Whitmore stood silently, processing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The person he had judged without knowing her story was someone whose responsibilities extended far beyond this small gas station. Someone who had spent years making decisions that affected communities, families, and public services across the state. Victoria did not react with anger. She did not use the moment to make anyone feel small. Instead, she simply looked at the situation with the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning. She understood that the most important lesson was not about her title. It was about every person who might experience a similar moment without having a position powerful enough to change the outcome instantly. Captain Reed approached Victoria respectfully and asked if she was all right. She nodded and replied that she wanted the situation handled fairly and reviewed carefully. Her response surprised some people. They expected a powerful person to demand immediate action. They expected authority to be used as a weapon. But Victoria showed something different. She showed that true leadership was not about proving power. It was about using power responsibly. As the gas station lights continued shining over the quiet parking lot, everyone there witnessed a moment that would be remembered for a long time. The person who seemed powerless had never been powerless at all. And the person who thought he understood the situation had finally learned the most important lesson of the night. A person's worth is never determined by what others assume when they first see them. The gas station remained quiet after the truth finally came to light. The same place that had witnessed confusion and uncertainty was now filled with a different feeling. There was no need for anyone to raise their voice. There was no need for dramatic words. The reality of what had happened was clear, and everyone standing there understood that the situation had become much bigger than they first imagined. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood silently, looking at Victoria Bennett with a completely different understanding. Moments earlier, he had seen only a person he believed he needed to question. Now he saw the governor of the state, but more importantly, he saw the person behind the title. A person who had remained patient even when she had every reason to react differently. A person who had chosen dignity instead of anger. Victoria looked around the gas station and noticed the faces of everyone watching. She saw Emily near the store entrance. She saw the other customers who had witnessed the entire exchange. She understood that this moment was not only about what happened to her. It represented something much larger. It represented all the people who did not have a title, a position, or a powerful name to protect them when they were misunderstood. Captain Marcus Reed carefully listened as Victoria explained what had happened from the beginning. She did not exaggerate. She did not try to make herself appear more important. She simply described the facts. She explained that the most important issue was not her identity as governor. The most important issue was how quickly assumptions had replaced understanding. Marcus Reed understood the meaning behind her words. He had spent years in public service and knew that trust was built through fairness, accountability, and respect. He looked toward Whitmore and reminded him that every interaction with the public carried responsibility. A uniform could represent protection, but it could never replace compassion. Whitmore listened quietly. For the first time that night, he was no longer focused on defending his own decisions. He was beginning to understand the impact of those decisions. He realized that the situation had not changed because Victoria was powerful. The situation had changed because the truth had finally been revealed. That difference mattered. Victoria had the ability to demand immediate consequences. She had the authority to turn the moment into a public example. But she chose a different path. She asked for a complete review of what happened and requested that the focus remain on improving the system, not simply blaming one person. Her decision surprised many people nearby. They expected someone in her position to seek personal victory. Instead, she chose a lesson that could help others. Emily watched Victoria closely and understood something important. Leadership was not about having the ability to control every situation. Leadership was about choosing the right response when you had that ability. The night at the gas station had started with assumptions and uncertainty. It ended with a reminder that respect should never depend on someone's social position, job title, or public recognition. Because true justice is not measured by who has the most power in the room. It is measured by whether people are treated with dignity before anyone knows their name. The night at the gas station eventually became a memory that stayed with everyone who witnessed it. What began as a simple stop during a long journey had transformed into a moment that revealed something much deeper about judgment, responsibility, and the meaning of true leadership. The bright lights above the pumps continued to shine as Victoria Bennett prepared to leave, but the people around her were no longer seeing her as just another person passing through. They had seen her patience. They had seen her dignity. They had seen how someone with great authority could choose understanding over anger. Emily Carter stood near the entrance of the store, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the first moment Victoria walked in. Nothing about her appearance announced her position. There was no sign that she was the governor. No announcement. No special treatment. Just a person having a normal conversation with another person. That was what made the moment meaningful. Victoria had not earned respect because of her title. She had shown why respect should exist before anyone knows a person's title at all. Before leaving, Victoria thanked Emily for staying attentive and honest throughout the situation. She reminded her that doing the right thing was not always easy, especially when people were uncertain or afraid to speak. But small acts of courage could make a difference. Emily carried those words with her because she understood that she had witnessed something more important than a misunderstanding at a gas station. She had witnessed a lesson about character. Officer Daniel Whitmore also left that night with a different perspective. The experience forced him to think about the choices he made and the assumptions that influenced those choices. He had believed he was simply doing his job, but he learned that every decision made by someone in a position of authority affects real people. Responsibility was not only about following procedures. It was about remembering the humanity of the person standing in front of you. Captain Marcus Reed later reviewed the situation carefully, focusing not only on what happened that evening, but on how similar situations could be handled better in the future. The goal was not revenge. The goal was improvement. Victoria believed that lasting change came from learning, accountability, and a commitment to doing better. Days later, the story spread throughout the state. Many people focused on the surprise of discovering who Victoria really was. But those who understood the deeper meaning knew that the most important part of the story was not her position. It was her response. She had every reason to reveal her identity immediately. She could have ended the situation with a single sentence. Instead, she allowed the moment to reveal the importance of treating every person with fairness, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Because justice should never depend on recognition. Respect should never depend on status. And kindness should never require someone to prove they deserve it. The lesson from that quiet gas station remains simple. A person's value is not hidden in a title, a uniform, or the opinions of strangers. It exists before anyone notices. And sometimes, the most powerful reminder of justice comes from the person who had the greatest reason to demand it, but chose instead to show compassion. Victoria Bennett did not need the world to know her name to prove her worth. The truth was already there. It had been there from the beginning.